I was ascribed today is constipation, and something which I guess all of you know, or you think you know, or you have some concept about. At the moment, I'm at Fortis Medical Research Institute in Gurgaon. The first question which I have for all of you, and let me just see how this poll works. Are you unhappy with your tummy? I mean, the contrary is that are you always very happy with your tummy? So if you are, then say yes. If you are not, then just say no. And then we go a little further. It just helps me to understand what the audience is like.
So, Dr. Chaudhary, the polling is underway. Give us about 15-20 seconds for everyone to poll in.
Sure. Let them listen to their tummy. And I think that's a very important part of the exercise. I keep telling my patients, listen to your tummy, or it is called gut feelings. And I find a lot of people today in their busy lives don't actually have time to listen to their gut. I think it's very, very important to listen.
So I think we have the responses with us, and more than 80-85% people have voted in. It's a pretty mixed bag we have. So about 53% people have said that they are unhappy with their tummy. And in fact, 54% have said they are unhappy with the tummy, and 46% mentioned that they are possibly happy with it. So it's a pretty mixed bag. Yeah.
So obviously, if the 46% are happy with their tummy, they have come because there's somebody in the family who's not happy. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time for them. But nevertheless, I'll take the discussion further and we'll unravel a few of the issues that we have with the tummy. You know, broadly, the GI tract, as we call it, we divide it into three parts for understanding symptoms. So we have the upper part, which is the food pipe and the stomach. And you know, the stomach produces acid called hydrochloric acid. And it has something to do with what happens immediately after food. So burning in the throat, heartburn, feeling of fullness, satiety, pain in the upper part of the stomach, that pertains to this upper part. The middle part is associated with digestion. So if digestion goes a bit awry, then you get central abdominal pain, cramps, you get flatulence, that's production of gas, bloating, a lot of diarrhea. If suppose the absorption is not good, then you get watery stools. And the last part is the colon or the large intestine. So the main reason why the large intestine was created by nature was that whatever is the residue from the small intestine, that's roughly about 1.5 liters of semi-liquid or liquidish stuff, it is given time here for the water to be absorbed, for stool to be formed, and gradually for it to be pushed down into what is called as evacuation. You know, that is the stool formation and evacuation through the rectum. Now, if you look at symptoms, interestingly, the major part of symptoms in the community pertains either to the large gut or to the upper gut. And in terms of frequency, although the middle gut is very important for function of digestion and absorption, symptoms related to that is a little uncommon. I mean, it would be about 15% or so. So the topic that I have been given today, and that causes a lot of misery, is actually how this large gut behaves. And one of the main topic is, of course, called constipation. So I'll go a little further and try to make you understand what we are talking about. I have one more question for you. This just helps me to understand. So I've now told you the three parts of the GI tract, and they have their own signature symptoms, you know. So could you just tell me, I'm sure each one of you have some symptoms in the gut. It's not possible to be born and to go to your end without having GI symptoms of a certain frequency. Now, could you tell me which one is the predominant one for you? So A pertains to the upper gut, B pertains to the middle gut, and C pertains to the lower gut, that's the colon, and D is seeing blood in the stools.
So again, a few more seconds, Dr. Gaur, while we collect the response.
Sure.
So I think we have more or less the responses in with us. About 26% people have voted for A, 35% for B, 20% for C, 4% for D, and there are about 16% people who said none of the above, so they are not facing any conditions.
Wonderful, very good. Now, I'll just ask you a question, obviously, on which I can't get an answer. But while you were trying to vote, did some of you find it very difficult to decide between, say, A or B, or between B or C, or A or C? I mean, you probably thought that there was a little bit of both. So if that happened to any one of you, and I guess that, at least it should have occurred to 30% of you, it's nothing unusual. And what I basically want to tell you is that between GI symptoms, there is a lot of overlap. And therefore, it's very difficult to say that only one symptom tells you about one diagnosis and one disease. And I'll take you further to understanding what we talk about dysfunctions of the gut. Okay? Now, talking about formation of stools and evacuation, that's, our motions. So, the food that we take in, it's fairly raw. It's partly digested. Of course, the process starts with the chewing and then it's in the stomach, gets mixed with acid and pepsin, goes down the small intestines where much of the nutrients are absorbed, and then into the large intestine. And the large intestine is actually the warehouse. So, your production in the industry has occurred and now you're in the warehouse and then the delivery has to take place. And this is a kind of a schematic diagram that what is lowest down here is the Thursday meal. And what is here is the Friday meal. Okay, that's more proximal, that's more recent in time. And then what is more here is Saturday meal. So basically it tells you that what you ate about 3 days earlier is likelihood to have become stool and is about to be expelled. What you have eaten recently, that is today or yesterday, is probably still somewhere here. So you need to understand that there is a time lag between the ingestion of food, digestion, and the formation of stool. Commonsensical, but it just helps you to keep things in focus. And I bring you to one more issue. After all, the food that goes into our mouth and we swallow it, and then it goes to the stomach. After that, it goes through a long journey. And these tubes, call it by any name, the small intestine, the large intestine, these tubes actually measure roughly about 18 to 20 feet. So it's pretty long actually. It's all crowded up, bunched up in the abdomen, so you don't realize it. And there are quite a few movements that occur there because of the muscles. So there are 2 or 3 types. One is called the peristalsis, where the food or the whatever is inside is being propelled down by a sweeping contraction. And in the colon, apart from peristalsis, you have one more type of contraction. It's called segmentation or mass movement. So here, instead of propelling it all the way down, you have a little to and fro movement with the food stuck there. And basically that gives you a little more time for the water to be absorbed, the stool to be solidified. And although that can actually be beneficial to you, it can also sometimes be the cause of pain, crampy pain. So it's just important for us to understand that there are different types of movements and certain symptoms may correlate with certain movements. Now, there has been a lot of discussion, obviously umpteen number of conferences and debates, books have been written on what is constipation. So first, let me tell you what is the medical definition of constipation. Medical definition of constipation is reduced frequency or increased hardness of stools. And when they say reduced frequency, the frequency is 2 or 3 stools per week or less. Actually, it used to be 2 stools per week. It's been relaxed a little bit to 3 because of the Asian representation. But given our Western colleagues who usually put up their definitions on the international fora, the definition was 2 stools or less per week. Okay. And of course, or the stool has to be extremely hard in consistency. Okay. Now, if you look at this definition, you would now start wondering that all of you who thought that you were constipated, are you really truly constipated? So let's find out. So it's sometimes very difficult to talk to patients and ask them how hard your stools are. So there's a group of doctors in Bristol, in England, and they came out with what is known as a Bristol stool chart. And this is actually a part of what is there in the OPD consultation room in almost every part of the world today. And it has 7 types of stools depicted through pictures. So when somebody says that my stool is hard, or somebody says it's a little soft or loose, they're asked to tell which is the type of stool that represents these pictures best. Is it 1, 2, and 3? It's hard lumps, sausage-like lumpy ones, or is it a smooth, long shaft one, or does it become fluffy with pieces and ragged edges and mushy stools, or watery or no solid? Although it sounds a little ghastly to many of you, it actually gives a much more semi-objective representation of what you're trying to say and what you're conveying to the doctor. And I'll tell you exactly in the next slide why it is so important. So if you just think about what is your predominant type, I'll go to the next poll question, and after that for a while there'll be a respite, no more questions till I come to the end. So which is your usual stool type? Is it in the upper part, 1 to 3, which is a bit hard and lumpy and sausage type? Is it the usual long ones but a bit softish, not too hard? Or is it a very loose type that gets scattered and watery?
And so we have a lot of responses already in Dr. Chaudhary, and predominantly it is the second type, which is number 4 to 5. About 63% people have voted for 4 to 5. 32% of people have voted for 1 to 3, and 7% people have voted for 6 to 7.
Very good. So now let me explain to you. If you are in the 4 to 5 category, that consistency of stool is, perceived by us to be normal consistency. If it is 1 to 3, then it is hard, and you need a little bit of, maybe modification of diet or something to soften it a little bit. If it is in the 6 to 7 category, it's obviously loose, and then we are talking about something like a little bit of what we would call as a chronic diarrhea. That's not constipation, really. Okay, and that's the reason why it's so important to understand a few of these basics before we go further. Otherwise, we would land up doing too many tests without any purpose. Now, I won't bore you with too many questions, and then I'll go to the subject, and then at the end of it, we will discuss. So why did I do all this mucky topic and, putting questions to you, getting your response? So here is what Dr. Bhandari and a patient were doing once in SGPGI. So the surgeon asks the patient, have you ever undergone an operation? So the patient says yes. So the communication is fine. So the surgeon asks, for what? So the patient says, for rupees 5,000. So the surgeon says, I mean, what did you have? So the answer is only rupees 4,000. So then the surgeon gets exasperated and says, you still don't understand. What was your complaint? So the patient says the bill was too high. So the point I'm trying to make is that whenever you go to a doctor, it's very important for the doctor to understand what exactly you mean and for you to understand what he's asking. So the two of them, if you see, they're both right in their own ways, but there is a complete mismatch or a miscommunication. So there was a study done on constipation, and like everybody who came into a clinic with a complaint of constipation, and doctors actually went further to find out what did the patient mean. So in 52%, that's over half, what they meant was that there was straining at stool. It was neither a reduced frequency of less than 3, nor was it in the category of 6 to 7. So it's actually not constipation. Hard stools, 44, fair enough. Even here you showed that 33% have constipation. But majority or many of them also had incomplete sense of evacuation, abdominal discomfort, and so on and so forth. And one of the things which makes us most unhappy, not just Indians, but even 62% of Americans, is that we are never happy with our bowel movements. And 62% of Americans feel that a good bowel movement every day is necessary for good digestive health. In India, it would be 80%. So you're not alone. Now I come to what exactly are the concerns that a person has. So suppose you have what you perceive as constipation and you go to a doctor. What would be your normal concerns? One is that why am I having it? Say for the last about 6 months or 1 year, my bowels are not moving very well. Do I have any other disease? And the doctor would be thinking also about, is there any other disease? And one of the things that would come to anybody's mind, especially if you're fond of Googling, is that any altered bowel habits, you should be wary of cancer. Now, this fear has gone a little too far, but fair enough. Let me put things in order. If you are above the age of 50 and if you have had a recent change in bowel habits, it is very important to rule out colon cancer. The reason being that with early detection, the treatment has become so very good. But if you're in your 30s and your constipation has been going on for the last 10 years, ever since you can recall, or you came to this city, it's very unlikely that you actually have cancer. So think of less ominous things, okay? So there are quite a few other things. So when do we do what tests? We will discuss it later on. And there's something that we need to know called organic versus functional. So most of the tests that we do, like colonoscopy, I'll show you a picture. It actually takes a peep into your whole colon and evaluates the structure of your colon. Okay, so this is what the picture is like. Okay, so in a colonoscopy, we go around and inspect the whole colon, and this is what the normal colon looks like, perfectly healthy. And what you're really worried about, if at all you happen to find it, is something like this, which is a growth, which once in a while one does find, but it's more of a uncommon finding. If you're doing a screening colonoscopy, most of the time you would expect to see this. Okay. So what we are looking at is structure. On the other hand, if suppose your structure is normal and you still have problems, be it constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, then we give it a status called functional, which means the structure of the organ looks okay, but obviously its functioning is impaired. Otherwise, why would you have symptoms? And there is a long list for that as to what are the symptoms and how to go about it, which we will discuss a little later if time permits. So everybody need not be worried about getting a colonoscopy done and to rule out a cancer or any other sinister disease, but these are what are called as red flag signs, which means if you have them and you are at a particular age, you need to consider looking or having your doctor take a deeper look. So if you are woken up at night frequently, especially for those who have loose stools, yes, it's something not quite normal. If you have to get up 2 or 3 times. If you see blood in the stool, so in the poll, none of you said that you have blood in the stools. So if you do see blood, it could well be piles or hemorrhoids, which is quite common. But also it's important to rule out something else, especially if it's associated with perhaps a bit of weight loss or you're on that other side of age. It could be due to recent use of antibiotics. Antibiotics disturbs the gut flora, and there is something called antibiotic associated diarrhea, which can be a cause of loose motions or altered bowel habits. If you have a family history of colon cancer, it's very important that we bring down the threshold of age that I mentioned as 50 down to about 30, 35. And or if you have any abnormalities, either on physical examination or on a blood test. So for example, if you're a otherwise healthy male of 40 and your hemoglobin comes to be 9, it's obviously something wrong, and you need to take a look. So those are the things that a doctor looks at, what are known as surrogate markers or other telltale evidences to decide when to take a deeper look. I have discussed this. Now I'll come to functional bowel disorder. And I thought I'll introduce you to this concept of what is called as Rome Foundation. Like Dr. Bhandari is associated with the foundation, and many of these foundations are doing fantastic work. So Rome Foundation started with a donation from a person who had a so-called type of constipation for which she got all tests done, consulted several doctors and couldn't find a reason. So when doctors don't find a reason, they often say that it's actually not there. But she says, but I have problems. So then they said, it must be all in your mind. It may not be so. So she actually started with a little bit of her own private kitty, a foundation called Rome Foundation, way back in '89, to get a group of senior scientists and doctors to study these disorders called functional bowel disorders. So these are disorders where you don't have a structural problem, but there is a functional problem. So what is causing the dysfunction? What is it? Why is it causing pain? Why is it causing so much discomfort? And this Rome Foundation has actually grown over a period of time. Tremendous amount of research has gone on. And every few years it comes out with its own findings and recommendations. And at this point, we are in what is called as a Rome 4 document, which was published about 4 or 5 years ago. So that more or less kind of summarizes our understanding as of now. It's a very important topic. And I thought that whenever you have a dedicated body looking at a particular problem, you usually come out with better answers than when everybody is doing everything in a general way. So we come to what is called irritable bowel syndrome. It's another name that you might say of constipation, but there's a slight difference. I'll explain this to you. Irritable bowel syndrome means that your bowel is somewhat irritable. So it doesn't function very smoothly. It causes pain and it causes stool which is not to your satisfaction. Your evacuation is not the way you would like it. So it can produce crampy pain, changes in bowel habit, constipation, loose stools, and so on and so forth. If it's very angry and growling, you might see mucus in the stools. And when you do all the tests, including your stool test and colonoscopy, everything is normal. And it's sometimes very frustrating for the patient to ask the doctor, but you did all the tests and you didn't find anything. You need to know what is irritable bowel syndrome. And that's what Rome Foundation is doing all that research on. How common is it? Now, you'll be happy to know that those of you who said that you have some symptoms, it's actually remarkably common. So you see, in most parts of the world, it's upward of 10% of the normal population. We are not talking about people coming to hospital, of the normal population, including one in India, which in fact, when I was the secretary, we did the first study, which showed about 8 to 10% in a door-to-door survey. Okay. But in many other parts of the world, it is as good as about 22 to 25%, which means that if you have the symptom, you're not alone. And you see, if you look at the prevalence in the US of IBS compared to other chronic diseases, right now, of course, we are talking about COVID. COVID is not a chronic disease, it's an acute disease. But if you look at frequency of chronic diseases, you find that actually IBS, or this functional bowel disorder, is actually much more common than any of the others. So in terms of commonness, it's very much there. So one of the ways that I talk to you about is to find out, do we need to rule out if there's a structural problem? Sure enough. So earlier on, we used to do a whole lot of these tests called barium studies, where you give something to drink, which was radio opaque, and it outlined the intestines, and you more or less found out if all was okay. And nowadays, you have better tests. So you have got CT scan, colonoscopy, and endoscopy, and so on and so forth. And now I come to the issue of constipation. So of those who felt that you were constipated and you have hard stools not evacuating properly, there are 3 types of constipation, and you need to know which one you belong to, or maybe if your father or mother or grandparents belong to. I hope most of you have seen that movie called Piku. If you haven't seen, I would say please go and see it. I thought it was fantastic, and it actually tells you a lot about medicine in a way, and the problem that this elderly gentleman had about clearing his bowels. So one of them is called slow transit, one is normal transit, and the other is called a defecation disorder. So what does it mean? A slow transit constipation means that in the entire colon, which is about 4 feet, the movement is very, very sluggish all over, from the cecum to the anus. In normal transit, somehow the transit seems to be normal, but the person is not happy. So that's what I talked to you about. It is the IBS category. And in the last one, which is called the defecation disorder, it's a very unusual one in which most of the colon is contracting well. It's propelling your stool down, but it's coming down to the lower part, that's the rectum. And one has a problem in evacuating it. So you often go and sit for a long time on the pot, you feel, it's there, but it's not coming out. And that is a very frustrating thing. It's called a defecation disorder, not to be confused with a slow transit constipation. So let me tell you how scientists find that out. This is what they do. They give you small little bits of a radio opaque marker, quite a few of them you're supposed to swallow, and they go down, and then you just study the movement of these markers in your colon. So after about 48 hours or so, between 48 and 72 hours, if you find that they're distributed all over the colon like this, it is a slow transit constipation. Overall movement is slow. On the other hand, if you see that the rest of the colon has been cleared and they've all come and gathered in the rectum, waiting to be expelled but not getting expelled, that is called a defecation disorder. Okay, so they have slight different connotations in the way that they're managed. So I'll tell a little bit about defecation disorders before I move on. So defecation disorder is a very frustrating kind of a feeling, where the problem is not so much with the exact movement of the colon, but whenever you strain, there is an angle which forms here. It's called the puborectalis muscle. And normally what is supposed to be done is that when you are sitting, especially on an Indian pot, and by the way, the Indian pot has been found to be better than a Western pot for constipation, there is a alignment of your sigmoid colon rectum with the anus. So, it becomes straighter. But here what happens is that for some reason, it keeps collecting and not coming down because the angle here made by a muscle called the puborectalis is quite acute. So there is a kind of a bend. And the more you press, the more is the contraction, and therefore you actually fail to expel that stool. It's very frustrating. So a lot of people actually therefore resort to using a finger for evacuation and so on and so forth, or go to tremendous lengths to just get their bowels cleared. And one of the tests which we do for those who are extremely troubled is also further to the other test, is actually called a balloon expulsion test. So where we put a balloon in the rectum from the anus, inflate it a little bit, and there is a particular norm that average people would be able to expel it or push it out with a certain degree of effort in a certain degree of time. And if some people are just not able to expel it, that tells you that there is a little problem with the way your rectum and anus are functioning. Okay. So this is all to fine-tune therapy for people who have been suffering for a long time, and all this has now become available to many of us in the world. I'll now change track a little bit. So I was talking a little bit about gut motility, but gut motility is not determined just by itself. I mean, it could be partly genetic, yes. It could be due to so many other factors. But one of the important factors which is emerging is the gut flora. And I hope you know that I shouldn't have used the word gut flora, but let me say the human microbiota. So if suppose all the germs from your body were removed, you would actually weigh about 4 to 5 kgs less than what you weigh, which basically means that about 3 to 5 kg of your weight is made up by germs which are either on the skin surface or in the gut. And if you talk about the gut, the major part where it is present is actually the colon, because the other parts relatively the density of the germs is much less. And can you imagine, it goes into trillions. In fact, I wrote an article recently in a French journal called Microbiota, and there's a huge amount of research going on to this area. And this is the amount of microbes there. So obviously, if they're there, they must be doing something. And if you disturb them by taking antibiotics and you get into problem, it just reminds you that they're there for a purpose. So we will talk a little bit about gut flora and its relationship to good bowel functioning. So I come to management. What do I do and how? So you first have to find out what is the type of problem you have. Are you constipated or are you the loose stool variety? So I understood about half of you are in the normal category with regard to your consistency. About a third have hard stools, and about a small proportion of 7 to 8 are in the loose stool category. For those who are constipated, you need to find out whether yours is a defecation disorder or a true constipation. And if it is a constipation, what type of constipation? It's probably important to rule out any of the complications or other precipitating factors. I discussed with you one of the most important ones being any structural disorders of the colon, especially if you are above the age of 45 or 50. And then if you find that the structure is normal, you presume that it's an abnormal function. You don't always have to prove it. You can actually start off by trying some medications or home remedies and see that if it works. If it doesn't, then of course there is a scope for further tests, but everybody doesn't have to go through all the tests. So I'll come to diet and lifestyle, which is probably the most important part. What to eat, when to eat, and what is meant by lifestyle. This is one of the terms that we throw around very easily nowadays, but we need to understand. So the most important aspect of diet, especially for people with hard stools and constipation, is fiber in the diet. So, there was a time when I think most of us used to munch a lot on fruits, especially fruits like guavas, and, had a lot of beans and stuff like that. Ever since my daughter went to the United States, I have learned about this fruit called avocado, which seems to be a hot favorite for all Americans. I really don't know how much is the fiber content. It is a little fatty though. But nevertheless, apples and pears and papayas are also very rich in fiber. Most of the lentils and beans are rich in fiber. Okay. So I think that fiber in the diet is a very important part of what gives bulk to the stool and softness to the stool. Further pictures, and all of them. So basically, lot of fruits, fibrous fruits and fruit juices, and green vegetables. Mind you, refined fruit juices are actually bad for health. They have a very high content of fructose and sugar. They're lacking in fiber, and they actually are propelling the present, I would say, the other pandemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now becoming a global problem. It's not as acute as COVID, but some other time we'll discuss about fatty liver disease. Okay. So it's whole fruits, whole grains. So remember that. Now, is fiber a wonderful thing? Why can't everybody eat as much as you want? Fiber has its own problems. So if you take too much of fiber, more than what your gut is able to accept, it's fermented by the gut flora that I talked about, which are there in the germs, which are there in the intestines, and they produce a good bit of gas. So a lot of flatulence and bloating can occur if you have taken too much fiber in too short a time without preparing your gut. It's a very typical situation. Suddenly a young guy gets married and the two of them decide to go to the gym and they decide to become health freaks. And the next day they start having a whole lot of sprouts. And they're doing everything right. And then 2 weeks later, they land up with me with a lot of bloating and gas. And very typical, I just asked them, have you started eating sprouts? And many of them would say, how did you know? It's very typical. So remember that they're good. Give a little bit of time before you build up your dose and just listen to your gut. How much is it able to handle? So it's called gut feelings, okay? There's of course one more issue I just thought I'll mention here. I've shown you a piece of bread here. I hope you know that one of the problems, especially the 7% of people who said that you have loose stools, one of the problems that is now coming to the surface is something called is gluten intolerance. You know, I mean, there are many names by which we did call it. So celiac disease, wheat intolerance, gluten sensitivity, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to at least do a simple blood test to exclude that, because you'll be surprised that right now 0.7% of the North Indian population is estimated to have some kind of a gluten sensitivity. So which we were all passing off earlier on. And the other one is of course lactose intolerance that many of you would know. I think I'll skip the diarrhea part because that is not part of today's seminar. I'll take it up some other time. But I'll come to a few other issues about IBS. So you might wonder, okay, I've described it. I've described stools, motility, but what is actually the cause of irritable bowel syndrome? The cause is that, you know, there is an altered motility of the gut. There is also possibly some degree of food intolerance. And I can't overemphasize this term called gut feeling. You know, there are people who tell me that every time I go to my village and I have this, I'm fine. And I come to the city and I have this and I have a problem. Listen to your gut. It's telling you something. The other issue when I gave you this example is emotional conflict or stress. Does it actually send signals down the nerve that go to the gut a little more, which is causing disordered motility? Because when you are happy in the village and when your problems start in Gurgaon, it could well mean that, I mean, you are having to face the boss from Monday, you know, and the stress of office life. So try to realize that. Look at metabolic and hormonal factors. Look at thyroid, especially hypothyroid people can have constipation, diabetes can have a host of bowel disorders and so on and so forth. And one of the mechanisms is decreased pain threshold. So, you know, when we put the balloon in the rectum and we inflate it to the same amount, say 60 ml, so people with IBS start complaining of pain at a much lower volume than people who don't have IBS, which means that for some reason, the nerve sensitivity, the receptors in your colon are a little more taut and sensitive in this condition. There is, of course, one condition called post-infectious IBS. I'll again discuss it some other time. This is, you know, if by chance you have had an explosive diarrhea, which was obviously infective, the immediate part settled down, but, you know, there is a lingering problem. 4 to 5 stools, still watery, crampy pain, stool cultures and everything negative. That's called post-infectious IBS, which has got a slightly different mechanism. So I'll discuss that with you sometime later on if any of you are interested. With regard to the tests we do, I told you that colonoscopy is the most important. A stool test is important. IgA, TTG for gluten sensitivity is important. And the other one, which is very common, is lactose intolerance. So it's a very simple test, which we do in our department. You're just given 50 grams of lactose as a solution. And then after that, you have to breathe into a apparatus. It's almost like the alcohol breath test that the police does. So you have to keep doing it for 2.5 to 3 hours. And if you get a spike, it tells you that your gut is not able to digest lactose. And, you know, if you are off lactose, you're remarkably better. And if you can't be off lactose, you still want to have ice creams. Now you have got very good drops and tablets which you can take, which would help you to digest your lactose. Now I'll come a little bit to two other issues. IBS is basically a problem of perception. I mean, after all, if you didn't have the pain or the discomfort, you wouldn't actually be worried, isn't it? So obviously it means that there are some sensations in your gut which are being trafficked up through the spinal cord into the brain. And once it goes there, it actually produces a feeling of discomfort, annoyance, feeling of unwellness, stress. And that feeling is also then relayed down through a similar nerve system back to the intestines. So this is called a vicious cycle. So it goes up and it comes down. So if there is hypersensitivity on one side or irritability, it comes down into making the gut a little more tight and squeezy, and it then becomes a vicious cycle. And you then have to learn how to break that vicious cycle. So this is what is called as somatic hypersensitivity or visceral hypersensitivity. So now this has been described by the Rome 4 as a central mechanism in IBS. So the word is central. So earlier on, people made the mistake of, asking people all the time that, are you stressed? Are you depressed? Are you anxious? And much of it actually is untrue. You don't have to be all those, but there could be something at your subconscious level, or what we call as a central mechanism, the mechanism in the nerves and in the brain, which makes your gut function differently, or it makes you perceive your gut functions differently. The sense of pain is a little more exaggerated at very small amounts and all that. Okay. So there has been quite a few trials of medicines. This is, of course, a slide which I use for the medical doctors, but I'm just showing it to you. So there's a host of agents which have been used from time immemorial, last 50 years. And the commonest one is usually some form of fiber for the constipation variety and the ones with hard stools. With the pain variety, you need some form of muscle relaxants. And there are quite a few others. Sometimes we have these prokinetic agents which actually improve the movement of your intestines or colon so that you're able to expel things better. And quite a few others, if suppose you have loose stools, then it helps to reduce the frequency and to tighten up your stools. So these are quite a few. I won't go into the details of this today, but I thought that I'll take your questions. So a group of medicines called antidepressants. Now, this is actually the problem. The problem is that they were initially used for depression. So they are called antidepressants. But interestingly, of all the medicines which have been tried in IBS, the maximum proven benefit has been with this group of medicines called low-dose tricyclic antidepressants. Now, because of the Google culture, every time you write this prescription, the patient goes to the chemist and the chemist says, this is a medicine for depression. And the patient gets very confused and he says that, but I don't have depression at all. This is what you need to understand, that there are now groups of medicines which have other functions apart from treating depression. So what they do is that they increase the threshold of pain in the nerve terminals in the rectum or in the colon. It actually reduces the perception of pain up the spinal cord to the brain. And therefore, it also relaxes the contractility in some parts of your colon when the nerve traffic comes down to the gut. And this is a very good group of medicines which are at this point in time still the best in class, which have been proven to be of benefit in certain types of IBS. In very small doses. You don't need to use the high doses used for depression. And this is again the drugs which are co-prescribed in IBS, a huge list. I'll not take you through these. But coming to, I just talked about the central mechanism, and you being, I think all of you, I think many of you are in the IT sector and so on and so forth. So you'll obviously ask me, but how sure are you that actually the brain and the nerves are involved? Well, actually studies have shown it. So now you have something called a functional MRI, in which whatever goes on in the brain, you can actually track the chemical composition shifts occurring on a dynamic basis. So if you get a particular symptom, you can see one place lighting up in some way. Okay. And when something else happens, something else lights up. And that way you are able to correlate certain functions of the body with what is happening in the brain. Okay. Earlier on, it was very simplistic. So if you moved your right hand, there was some degree of activity in the opposite parietal lobe and so on and so forth. We have gone a little far to now understanding body gut functions and their relationship with different parts of the brain. Okay. And fortunately or unfortunately, they are also linked with certain types of emotions. So we can't run away from them. So this is again a picture of what is called as a functional MRI. And if you understand, this is an area called the amygdala, which is in the lower part of the brain. This is the one area which deals with emotions, stress, and memory. And it's been found that, if that part lights up every now and then, when you get a bowel disorder, it more or less gives you a fair good indicator that, look, you have to, it's almost, the example I keep giving. If this bulb is not working, I can have the bulb replaced. But every now and then, if I find the bulb is not really working, a good engineer is going to look at the voltage or going to see if the electricity is there or not. Okay. So I think the same function applies here. The end organ is important, but you have to also look beyond the end organ if you have to take a more holistic approach to IBS or constipation. So this is now being described by the Rome 4 Foundation document as a brain-gut axis. So there is an axis of nerves which connect the gut with the brain. And one more limb has been added to it, which is called the microbiota. And obviously you'll understand why, because that's the reason why there are so many different types of probiotics in the market now. Somebody is having Yakult, somebody is having something else, because they have found that these three things, they form a trio which seems to have some degree of importance in your gut function and your bowel movements. Okay, so I thought that I'll put things in context for you and try to take you or elevate your level of understanding from only the gut and only fiber to how other mechanisms also work in what you perceive as incomplete or an unsatisfactory evacuation. This is the last question I have for you. If you can get your fingers down onto the voting pads again, I won't bother you much. The last one. So can you tell me what type of, I'm sorry, can I just see that a little bit? Yeah, just a minute. What do you think worsens your constipation, or shall we say your bowel symptoms? Let me broaden it a little bit. And this is only to see how introspective and shall we say explosive you are about your own self, that how well you understand yourself. So what do you think worsens your bowel symptoms? Is it the food time, the eating time? Is it medications? When you take a medication, say for a headache pill, your bowel goes for a toss? Is it exercise? In fact, yesterday I had a young fellow, he said that ever since lockdown, and I'm not exercising, my bowels are not moving. So if I start jogging every time, I get better. And or stress. So let me see what is your perception about the problem, and can I have your voting, please?
So Dr. Chaudhary, we have the results in. About 50% of people have mentioned they have selected the option of food type, almost 48%. Eating time as 17%, medication as 4%, exercise 2%, and stress about 28%. So primarily it's food type about 48% and stress about 28%.
Very good. So I think, if there is at the end of my talk, if I have been able to achieve one thing, I would leave you with just 2 slides and I'll wind up. So treatment of IBS is relieving symptoms, but not just the bowel symptoms. You have to feel satisfied and happy. So there are abdominal symptoms, diarrhea, constipation part, the bloating part, and quite a bit of it. But this is like looking at the bulb or looking at the refrigerator. If your refrigerator is conking off every now and then, please, please, please be a wise fellow and try to see what is happening to your voltage stabilizer or the voltage and the electricity. Okay. And I think that 28% who mentioned stress, extremely important. I think that, you have already crossed the first threshold, in the sense that you have been able to understand and listen to your gut. So you understand your gut feelings. And once you have understood it, you should be able to take it to its logical conclusion. So these are the different factors which actually operate in what is called bowel function or dysfunction. And it's not a one single formula or one single cause and one single prescription that would help. So it's a complex issue. But the more you read about it, the more you discuss, the more you try to introspect, the more wise you will be. Because remember one thing, if most of your average age is around 40 to 50, Pratik told me. So it means about half your life is over, but there is yet another half to go. So how you live that other half, it could make a lot of difference. So one of the things that you should be able to live happily with should be your gut and your bowels. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.